Shannon Henry here. If you like narration that turns complex world events into clear, story-driven moments, make sure you subscribe to Shannon Henry, and when we're done, leave a comment with what you think, because the details in this scene raise questions that don't have simple answers. Now take a breath and step into a world where the most valuable weapon isn't a tank or a jet. It's a factory. A world where the battlefield isn't just trenches and territory, but microchips, clean rooms, guidance modules, and the invisible electronics that tell missiles where to turn. And in this dramatized scenario, one night, that invisible heart is found and erased. It starts on March 10th, not with a siren, not with a headline, but with a decision made in the quiet space between intelligence and timing. Somewhere, planners stop thinking like soldiers and start thinking like engineers. Not, where is the next line, but what keeps the entire machine alive? Because if you can't stop the front line directly, you aim behind it. You aim at the parts no speech can replace. You aim at what an army needs when the speeches are over and the day turns into logistics, repairs, replacements, calibration, production. And the target is deep in Bryansk. Bryansk isn't supposed to be a place of fear. It's supposed to be a place of routine, a city protected, on paper, by layered air defenses, systems designed to detect, track, and intercept, names that sound like certainty, numbers that sound like safety. In this story, that certainty is anchored around a facility tied to microelectronics, a complex often described as part of the Kremny Group. To an average person, a microelectronics factory sounds dull, quiet, industrial, but to a modern military, it can be the neurological center, because here's the truth that changes everything. A missile without guidance is just expensive metal. A radar without its modules is just a blind circle. An air defense system without reliable electronics is an empty promise. So when someone says they hit a factory, what they really mean is this: they hit the brain. At first, the day looks ordinary. Cars move, people commute, shops open. A city lives like it always has. And that normality is part of the weapon. Because the strike doesn't arrive like a storm you can smell in the air. It arrives like a sentence that ends before you realize it began. Storm Shadow cruise missiles, low-flying, built to avoid attention until attention is too late. They cross the border and keep going. Over 100 kilometers beyond the line that was supposed to separate war from home. And in the control rooms meant to prevent exactly this, something changes. Confidence turns into calculation. Calculation turns into panic. There's a rhythm to air defense: detect, identify, confirm, assign, intercept. But that rhythm depends on time, and Storm Shadow is designed to steal it. It doesn't climb high and announce itself. It hugs the landscape. It borrows the earth as cover. It turns radar horizons into blind spots. And then impact. Not a warning strike, not a symbol on the edge, not a shattered window. In this narrative, the missiles go for the core, assembly halls and critical sections, places where sensitive machinery and controlled environments make military-grade electronics possible. That's what makes the strike feel surgical. Because damage is one thing, but targeted internal collapse is another. A precision hit on a factory's inner skeleton is designed to do more than burn. It's designed to complicate recovery, to destroy the parts you can't replace quickly, to force months of uncertainty into a system that runs on schedules. And there's something else here, something that makes the whole moment feel like a message. Because air defenses don't just fail physically, they fail publicly. When a shield is advertised as untouchable, every breach becomes twice as loud. The first explosion hits steel, the second hits reputation, and the third hits the mind. In this story, that mind shock spreads fast, not because people are told to be afraid, but because they feel the gap between what they were promised and what just happened. First comes the flash, then the shock wave that arrives like a fist, then the delayed thunder rolling across the city, heavy, unmistakable. And after that, the sky becomes evidence. A column of smoke rises, dark, thick, and stubborn, the kind of smoke that refuses to be translated into minor incident, the kind that turns official calm into something fragile. Officials scramble to control the narrative. You hear familiar phrases: intercepted, debris, contained. But containment isn't something you declare. It's something you prove. And when the smoke is visible for hours, when the sound carries for miles, when secondary explosions follow the first blast like punctuation, the denial doesn't just fail, it backfires. Because people don't need a briefing to understand fear. They understand it in their chest, in their windows shaking, in the sudden silence after the impact, when everyone is waiting for the next sound. In homes across the city, a phrase spreads, half disbelief, half dread. Russia is burning. And then the symbolic confirmation arrives. In this narrative, the authorities declare a day of mourning. A day of mourning is what happens when the story gets too big to hide. Now, the outline of this scene describes 7 missiles in total, with multiple direct hits and major secondary explosions, and that detail matters because it changes what this looks like from a distance. 1 missile can be framed as an accident, 2 can be framed as a warning. A coordinated volley aimed at the same complex is something else. It suggests verified coordinates, planned approach routes, and confidence that the strike will reach its target. And that's where technological asymmetry shows itself. Storm Shadow is a weapon designed around a cold idea. If you can't outnumber the defenses, you outthink them. Low radar cross-section, terrain following flight, a profile that hides in the seams of geography. But in this story, it's not only engineering, it's information. Because to hit a factory's most valuable areas, you need more than a map. You need insight. The scene points toward real-time intelligence, satellite tracking, pattern-of-life observation, and confirmation from people close enough to know which building is truly important. Partisan networks, local sources, the quiet human layer beneath the loud hardware. And if that's true inside the logic of the story, then the strike is not only a physical penetration. It's an intelligence penetration. It's the realization that secrecy has limits, that a guarded facility can still be seen, that a high wall doesn't stop a coordinate. But let's talk about why this factory is described as irreplaceable. In this scenario, the Kremny complex doesn't produce everyday consumer chips. It produces specialized components tied to the armed forces. Think about what that includes: guidance and precision modules that help ballistic systems find their aim, power and radar components that keep air defense networks alive, communication devices that connect units under pressure, electronic warfare suites that can jam, distort, and blind. These aren't luxury items. They're the thinking layer of warfare. And the danger is that you can lose that layer without losing a single soldier on the day of the strike. That's what makes it so strategically cold. Because the front line might not immediately collapse, the artillery might still fire tomorrow. The drones might still fly next week. But the repair cycle becomes slower, the replacement pipeline becomes thinner, and every damaged system starts living on borrowed time. To understand how brutal that is, imagine a hospital during a crisis. You still have doctors, you still have beds, you still have power, but the supply room runs out of what makes modern treatment modern. No sterile equipment, no specialized tools, no replacement parts for machines. The hospital doesn't explode. It simply becomes less capable each day. That is what a bottleneck does to a military. It doesn't always create a dramatic collapse. It creates a slow decline in capability that shows up weeks later in moments that suddenly go wrong. Now, add sanctions. Since 2022, export controls and restrictions tighten the flow of advanced technology, and microelectronics is the sharpest choke point. Steel can be sourced, fuel can be rerouted, explosives can be produced. But high-grade, military-standard microelectronics is a different game. It requires precise equipment, stable supply chains, specialized materials, trained engineers, and quality assurance that doesn't break under pressure. So, in this narrative, when the main certified facility is damaged badly, the alternatives become fragile. Parallel imports, gray market brokers, front companies, third country routes, and those routes can keep a system limping, but they also create new weaknesses. A shipment can be delayed, a bank can refuse a transfer, a supplier can disappear, a batch can fail quality checks, and in war, even a small failure can become a battlefield loss later. Not because the enemy is stronger, but because your machine can't stay consistent. In this scenario, that inconsistency is the hidden cost. Even when parts arrive, the question becomes trust. Do you trust the batch? Do you trust the calibration? Do you trust the testing? If you do not trust those steps, then every finished weapon carries a doubt inside it, and doubt spreads. This is where the story introduces a kind of geopolitical loneliness. People often say, rely on allies. In this scene, the answer is not just politics. Its capability. Iran is stretched by its own needs and threats. North Korea's strength is volume of older munitions. But microelectronics for advanced radar and missile guidance belongs to a different tier of technology. So the conversation inevitably turns to China. China is powerful enough to matter, but also connected enough to be cautious, because the global economy has a silent weapon too. Secondary sanctions. If major companies and banks face punishment for supplying military-grade technology, they start calculating risk. And war machines don't like risk. They like certainty. So in this narrative, even if Beijing can sell commercial products and raw materials, the most sensitive components become a question mark. Not because China cannot, but because China may not want the cost, and that uncertainty means the wound stays open. Now picture the reaction inside Russia. When a facility like this is hit, the government's first instinct is to downplay, because fear is a second front. But downplaying can turn into humiliation when the evidence is too large, and humiliation breeds anger. In this story, the Kremlin blames external actors, Britain, NATO intelligence, trying to move the spotlight away from the failure of the defensive shield. But even nationalist commentators and war bloggers, voices that usually push the official line, are shaken. Their complaint is simple. The war was presented as something happening over there, and now the heart of the territory is being struck. When loyal voices feel betrayed by reality, the narrative unity cracks, and that crack can be louder than the explosion. But the night doesn't end in Bryansk, because while smoke hangs over that city, the psychological pressure shifts toward the south. Sochi. Sochi is presented here as a safe haven, a coastal symbol of comfort, a place where the elite can exhale, and that is exactly why it matters. If you can make Sochi feel unsafe, even for one day, you don't just target logistics, you target the subconscious. In this narrative, drones arrive in waves, not one dramatic moment, a long, grinding presence, hour after hour. This kind of operation doesn't need to destroy every structure to succeed. It needs to force a certain thought into people's minds. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. That thought is a weapon, because once it spreads, it changes behavior. And behavior is where the economic shock begins. Sochi's airport closes for a full day in this story. Flights stop, schedules collapse. Hundreds of people are stranded. They sleep on luggage. They wait with uncertainty as a constant background noise. If you've ever been trapped in a place you expected to pass through, you know the feeling. Time becomes heavy. You start measuring hours as pressure. And every person stuck there becomes a carrier of the story. They call family, they message friends, they tell others, it happened, it's real. The war, which once lived in distant reports, enters ordinary conversation, not as politics, as personal disruption. Then the land routes. Rail and energy infrastructure are struck in the outline of this scene. That detail matters because it's not about spectacle. It's about movement. A modern state survives on circulation. Fuel moves, food moves, equipment moves, people move. When movement is interrupted, everything else becomes harder, not impossible, harder. And harder is how wars are won, not always by decisive victories, but by repeated stress until the machine can't keep pace. In a city where tourism is a dominant part of the economy, even a short period of perceived danger can have a long tail. Tourists don't book into uncertainty. Investors don't love volatility. Businesses don't thrive on fear. So in this narrative, the drone siege becomes a bruise on the city's sense of normal life, a reminder that prestige doesn't stop physics. Now the story widens again, and the geography becomes a chain. It's not just Bryansk, it's not just Sochi, it's Krasnodar, it's Armavir, it's oil terminals and storage facilities. In the outline, drones target oil-loading infrastructure, sites that matter for Black Sea and Azov logistics. And then tanks burn. 2 or 3 giant fuel reservoirs go up. Millions of liters become fire. There's a special kind of horror in that, because fuel is supposed to be stored power. It's supposed to be security. It's supposed to be, we can keep going. But when fuel burns, it becomes a symbol of vulnerability. It becomes proof that the energy network is not invincible. And again, the theme returns. This is not just about destroying. It's about disrupting. Airports closed, rail links severed, energy sites burning. A logistics network can take hits. But when hits arrive in coordination, the network's confidence cracks. And once confidence cracks, every driver, every dispatcher, every planner starts making defensive choices. Routes become longer, deliveries slow, margins shrink, stress rises. The whole system starts breathing heavier. There is another layer here as well. When a country is forced to defend everything at once, it starts spreading its protection too thin. More patrols, more checkpoints, more alerts, more strain. And strain creates mistakes. Mistakes create openings. Openings invite the next strike. This is how pressure becomes strategy. And after a night like this, the aftermath isn't only smoke and statements. It's adaptation. It's a system trying to harden itself without admitting it's afraid. Factories begin to disperse work into smaller sites. Warehouses split into quieter locations. Air defenses get shifted, but every shift leaves a new gap somewhere else. Security becomes heavier, slower, more suspicious, and that suspicion has a cost: delays, bottlenecks, friction inside the machine itself. Even when nothing is exploding, the war still reaches into daily life, through shortages, through detours, through the feeling that the next normal day might not stay normal. That's why the date in this narrative is framed as a turning point, March 10th to March 11th, 2026. The supposed 3-day operation myth collapses under a new reality. War is no longer held at the edge. War has reached the interior, and in this story, it reaches it in the most modern way possible, not by marching in, but by reaching through the air, into the infrastructure that keeps everything running. Now, I want to be careful here, because scenes like this can be emotionally powerful. but what makes them truly unsettling is not emotion, it's logic. The logic of modern conflict is that visibility is vulnerability. Factories can be targeted, depots can be mapped, rail junctions can be timed, airports can be disrupted. And once a side proves it can do that repeatedly, the other side faces a new problem. Protecting everything is impossible, so you start prioritizing. And prioritizing means admitting some things are less protected, and admitting that is a psychological defeat. So here's the human weight that hangs in the smoke. When safe places are shown to be vulnerable, public faith begins to shift. A government can order statements, it can blame foreign intelligence, it can promise retaliation, but it can't easily restore a feeling. It can't easily convince people that shields are strong when reality has already contradicted them. And once doubt spreads, doubt doesn't stay neatly contained. It leaks into everything. Confidence in leaders, confidence in victory, confidence in tomorrow, because the war stops being a story and starts being a shadow over daily life. So here are the 2 questions I want you to answer, honestly, in the comments. First, if you were planning an operation like this, would you prioritize industrial targets like the Bryansk microelectronics hub to slow the war machine, or symbolic targets like Sochi to shake morale, and why? Second, do you think modern wars are now decided more by factories, supply chains, and repair capacity than by dramatic frontline advances? I read the comments, and I want to hear your perspective. And if you want more narration like this, clear, intense, and focused on the real mechanics behind big headlines, subscribe to Shannon Henry and turn on notifications. Because the most frightening part of this scene isn't the explosion, it's what the explosion reveals, that the distance between the front and home can shrink to nothing overnight.